Hi, I'm Shona Lee, and I talk about complex systems and moral sensing in complex systems and understanding complex systems and how complex systems live in people's bodies. I will tell you that one of the problems I have is that living in my body and my mind, there's a lot of math. And so I experience the world as a whole lot of time-evolving surfaces that contains cats in a box. The cats are part of my local reality. There's a couple of things I want to talk about today. One of them is what physicists mean when they say to a first approximation. One is about tipping points, and one is about what we do when we are faced with the possibility of huge amounts of tipping points. So, as I said, I experience the world as these sort of time-evolving surfaces. That's not like I go through the world and I see people, but I also can kind of see the traces of their history, and I can see the energy flows, and I can see how they have access to power and how they have access to money, because I studied all the math, and then I studied the social sciences, and then I studied the critical theory, and then I studied the feminist philosophy. And so I've got this whole world living inside my head that writes itself in metaphor, and the metaphor that it uses is one of surfaces, because surfaces give me some sense of how things are proceeding through the world. And I want to show you my drawing of to a first approximation, and I think I can turn this around. Okay, so when we say to a first approximation, can I turn the light on also? I can, kind of. What we're saying is that there's a way that this particular function behaves, a way that this time-evolving system is, and we have a local intuition, and our local intuition is, it feels more like this. And that's because we live inside this box. So this local intuition is valid inside this box, but it's not as valid at this corner or at that corner. It's most valid in the center here. So these out here are places where it starts to diverge from reality. And the farther we are up here, the more our model diverges from reality. And in fact, we can go so far away that it's just not valid anymore. Like, it's just not giving us a good approximation at all. So we are all working with local intuitions that have evolved in particular energy regimes with access to particular resources, in particular political environments. And when we go forward and we're facing places where we're going to be in a different energy regime, we may be in a different political environment, we're not really sure where food is going to come from if we have multi-bread basket failures, our local intuitions aren't going to work any longer. So this is the first phrasing of to a first approximation. The next thing I want to show you is stability and tipping points. So the things that we are, in my head, the surfaces, they're not even bowls. Like, they're not just not two-dimensional. They're not really three-dimensional. It's not a bowl. It's this like n-dimensional local minimum. But a local minimum is something that's just bowl-shaped, which if you drop something into it, it will tend to stay in the bowl. So a local minimum mathematically is this kind of bowl shape. And it doesn't have to be this shape. When we describe things with math, we start off with 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, and then we go quite mad, and we wind up with the parameters in AIs that can be millions. And effectively what you're doing there is a million dimension calculation. The system, this bowl, has what's called good secondary stability. I learned this one from canoeing. When you design a canoe with a very flat bottom and a soft curve, it's got good, this one has really good primary stability. It's what a lake canoe would be shaped like, but it also has pretty good secondary stability, which means that it tends to fall back. So this, if you're imagining this as a system, could be representing the stock market. It could be representing a forest, an ecosystem, a social system, and it has forces that tend to bring it back to center. There are feedback loops and regulatory flows usually, which basically go, okay, you can get this far, there's a homeostasis, you can get this far away, but it's tending to go back to its happy place, which is continuing to be a stock market or a forest or an ecosystem or a social structure. This kind of system has really good primary stability, but it also has this tipping point where literally it's not going to go back to this anymore. It's going to come and collapse. A lot of systems, we don't know what the tipping point is. We know that in complex systems, as they near a tipping point, as they near what we call a phase transition, which is a shift from one of these stable regimes to another, this is a phase transition. This thing here, when you're up here, I've said a couple of times, if you see an 8 sigma event, you didn't. This is where you have a stock market crash. This is where you have surprise outcomes in elections. This is the Arab Spring. This is also an ecosystem collapse. This is the fisheries collapse on the east coast of Canada. This is something which we were pretending we were still in this part of the system, and we pushed it so far out that it could no longer make its way back to our imagined model of what it was. And as I said here, this is local intuition. These are our maps, these are our institutions. This is how we know how to navigate the system as it is. This is what says, okay, well, we know how to do this. But what we need, if we push ourselves, and it increasingly looks like we're pushing ourselves out into one of these things out here, is we need wayfinding skills. We don't need maps, because the maps are of what was. And the wayfinding skills are how we work collaboratively to make new knowledge, to sense our way in the universe, to find our way to new possibilities, to discover what the actual flows and energies are in that particular area. How many people can be supported in what way, what technologies are appropriate and work without pushing us so far out of balance that we cause the system to collapse again. This is where we've been for the last couple of 100 years, is pushing on every system as hard as we possibly can. And the biggest risk with AI, and Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about this like a lot, is that it gives us the power to push even harder on these systems. They collapse because they're hitting what we call exogenous, which means outside, which means unaccounted for shocks, which means we're doing things to the systems over and over and over again that constantly cause them to be under stress and at risk of collapse. And if we want to not have our systems be under stress and at risk of collapse, we have to approach them with much more humility. We have to sense into them and be more gentle. We have to adjust around the edges, and we have to constantly say, are we in fact still in the part of the system where we have valid local knowledge, or have we completely moved to a new part of the universe? And when we are not in alignment with our systems, we need to recognize that reality is not just Mother Nature bats last. Reality bats last. Thermodynamics bats last. The real systems we live in bat last. We do not We do not have the capacity, with all our cleverness and our human minds, to override the reality we live in, no matter how much we might want to.